Treblinka was the Nazi regime's second deadliest extermination camp, surpassed only by Auschwitz. But unlike the latter, Treblinka had no factories or medical selection. It was a center of immediate annihilation. From its opening in July 1942 until its forced closure in October 1943, an average of 6,000 people were murdered there every day. No prisoners remained alive. There were no survivors to recount what happened there because everything was designed to prevent them from happening. The trains arrived loaded with men, women, and children, lured by the promise of resettlement. They were stripped naked, stripped of their belongings, and led directly to gas chambers disguised as showers. The bodies were then buried or cremated in open-air pits. Treblinka I, Birth of the Nazi Hell. In November 1941, the German authorities established Treblinka I in a wooded area of the Sokołów district within the general government of occupied Poland. The location was no coincidence. The site offered three strategic advantages: proximity to the Malkinia-Siedlce railway line, geographic isolation that hampered outside observation, and exploitable natural resources. A gravel quarry promised materials for German military infrastructure, while the nearby Bug River allowed for hydraulic flood control projects. Commandant Theodor van Eupen, an SS officer with experience in prison administration, was ordered to organize a penal labor camp. Van Eupen designed a hierarchical structure where Jewish prisoners, along with gypsies, communists, and common criminals, worked under the supervision of Jewish kapos, who reported directly to German guards and Ukrainian auxiliaries. The population fluctuated between 800 and 1,200 inmates, constantly changing due to the high mortality rate. Living conditions were deliberately brutal. The barracks lacked thermal insulation and heating. Prisoners slept on wooden platforms without blankets, even during the Polish winters. Rations consisted of diluted soup and substandard black bread, with quantities varying according to the group's work output. Access to drinking water was strictly limited, and adequate sanitary facilities were lacking. The daily routine began before dawn with the prisoner count. Work teams headed to the quarry to extract gravel, a task that lasted from early hours until dusk, with barely a break for lunch. Other groups worked on hydraulic projects, building dikes, channeling sections of the Bug River, and leveling marshy land. These projects responded both to military needs and to the Nazi ideology of exploiting the occupied territory. Van Eupen kept meticulous records of production, discipline, and mortality, reports of which were sent weekly to the Radom district office. A February 1942 inspection documented 1,100 active prisoners, with a 10% weekly turnover rate due to deaths from exhaustion, illness, and summary executions. Corporal punishments were systematic: beatings for insufficient performance, executions for escape attempts, and additional labor under armed guard. The testimonies of Israel Simlik and Oskar Stroczynski, collected after the war, reveal details of daily survival. Prisoners collected food scraps from the German staff's garbage heaps, risking severe punishment. Personal hygiene was impossible. Without soap or sufficient water, infectious diseases spread rapidly. Typhus, dysentery, and pneumonia decimated the population. The sick were removed from the camp or executed immediately without medical treatment. The efficiency of forced labor was measured in tons of gravel extracted and cubic meters of earth moved in hydraulic projects. Van Eupen implemented a system of daily quotas that prisoners had to meet under threat of reduced rations or physical punishment. The average survival time within the camp was less than 3 months, a figure the German authorities considered acceptable to maintain productivity without excessive food or housing costs. During the first months of 1942, Treblinka I operated according to these parameters without significant alterations. However, the operational framework changed radically with the implementation of Operation Reinhard in March of that year. This operation, designed by Odilo Globoknik with direct authorization from Himmler, sought the systematic physical elimination of the Jewish population of the general government through specialized extermination centers. Treblinka was selected as one of the 3 main sites for this operation, along with Bełżec and Sobibor. The decision was based on logistical criteria: its isolated location, proximity to major railway junctions, and previous experience handling Jewish populations. Unlike other camps that combined forced labor with extermination, the new complex would have a purely eliminatory function. Planning for Treblinka II began in July 1942. 1.5 kilometers from the existing labor camp, SS engineers with experience from Belzec began construction of a facility specifically designed for mass extermination. The design sought absolute logistical efficiency, a closed circuit from arrival by rail to final disposal of corpses with no permanent housing areas or work facilities. Richard Tomalla, the engineer responsible for the design, applied lessons learned from Belzec to avoid operational problems. The gas chambers were sized for greater capacity, the mass graves were dug deeper, and a more efficient sorting system for belongings was established. Christian Wirth, Inspector General of Operation Reinhard, personally oversaw the technical details. The construction employed labor from Treblinka I itself, whose prisoners were temporarily brought in to erect fences, level grounds, and build structures. These workers were unaware of the ultimate purpose of the facilities they were constructing. Many participated in the construction of their own future execution chambers without realizing it. Treblinka I continued to operate in parallel during the construction of Treblinka II, maintaining its forced labor functions until July 1944. However, its purpose was gradually subordinated to the operation of the Extermination Center. Some labor camp prisoners were incorporated as auxiliary laborers in the sorting of belongings and maintenance of facilities at Treblinka II. The transformation was completed in August 1942, when the first trains of deportees began arriving directly at Treblinka II. The contrast between the two camps was stark. While Treblinka I maintained the fiction of productive labor, Treblinka II operated as an extermination machine with no labor pretensions. Deportees arrived, were executed, and their bodies were cremated or buried the same day. Treblinka II, Total Extermination Design. Treblinka II was conceived as an instrument of direct extermination, without secondary functions of forced labor or prolonged detention. Its architectural design followed an industrial logic, to maximize the number of eliminations in the shortest possible time, with minimal operational personnel and without interruptions in the flow of victims. Every spatial element was calculated to facilitate initial deception, control during the process, and efficiency in the final disposal of bodies. Construction took place between July and August 1942 under the supervision of Richard Tomalla and Christian Wirth. Both had participated in the design of Belzec and applied the technical lessons learned to overcome operational problems encountered at the first Operation Reinhard camp. The labor force consisted of Jewish prisoners brought from transit camps, who were systematically eliminated once their construction work was completed. The camp was divided into 3 functionally independent sectors, separated by double-height barbed wire fences and plant screens that obscured vision between areas. This segmentation prevented new arrivals from observing the fate of previous groups while facilitating German personnel control over each phase of the process. The first sector was the reception area, designed to simulate a functioning railway station. A siding entered the camp perimeter directly from the Malkinia-Grodzisk branch line. The landing platform was equipped with visual elements typical of real stations: clocks painted on wood, a booth simulating a ticket office, signs with fictional destinations and directional signs in German and Polish. Benches and wastebaskets completed the scenery intended to maintain calm among the deportees. The sorting huts flanked the platform. These wooden structures contained numbered hooks where new arrivals were to hang their clothes in an orderly fashion. Signs read, "Remember the number to retrieve your belongings after bathing." Deportees were given a piece of string to tie their shoes, reinforcing the illusion of a temporary and reversible process. The second sector housed the administrative and residential facilities for the German and Ukrainian auxiliary personnel, barracks for SS officers, dormitories for guards, mess halls, weapons depots, and maintenance workshops occupied this area. A central office coordinated communications with Berlin and managed train arrival schedules. The isolation of this area from the extermination sector prevented the administrative staff from having direct contact with the execution process. The third sector, called the Upper Camp by the German operators, contained the actual extermination facilities. Access to it was restricted to specialized technical personnel and members of the Sonderkommando. Additional fencing and permanent armed guards ensured that no deportee could retreat once they entered this area. The connection between the reception area and the extermination sector was through the tube, Schlauch, a narrow corridor approximately 100 meters long and 3 meters wide. The walls consisted of barbed wire fences covered with intertwined pine branches, which impeded lateral visibility and any escape attempts. The floor was leveled with packed earth and gravel. The design required continuous linear movement with no possibility of backtracking or detours. Watchtowers flanked the tube every 20 meters, manned by Ukrainian guards armed with rifles and the light machine guns. The corridor ended directly at the gas chamber doors, with no antechambers or intervening spaces to allow for organized resistance. The gas chambers were built in 2 phases. The first building, erected in July 1942, contained 3 rectangular chambers, each 4 by 4 meters in size and 2.5 meters high. The walls were solid brick, windowless, and the roof was hermetically sealed. The metal doors opened outward and had external bolts operated exclusively by German personnel. Mock showers were installed on the ceiling of each chamber, metal nozzles not connected to water pipes, intended solely to reinforce the illusion of sanitation. The interior walls were painted white to simulate a medical or hygienic environment. Small openings in the walls allowed gas to enter from an adjacent engine room. The capacity of these first chambers proved insufficient for the projected volumes of Operation Reinhard. In August 1942, a second building was built with 10 larger chambers, each measuring 4 by 8 meters, with a capacity for 500 to 600 people per session. This expansion allowed for an operational capacity of 10,000 to 15,000 eliminations per day in continuous shifts. The gas-generating engines were located in a separate structure adjacent to the chambers. Initially, captured Soviet diesel engines, probably taken from T-34 tanks, were used. The carbon monoxide produced by these engines was channeled through exhaust pipes into the chambers. Operating the system required specialized technicians to start, regulate, and maintain the engines. The mass graves were dug parallel to the chamber buildings, measuring 50 meters long, 10 meters wide, and 7 meters deep. These pits were designed to hold the bodies produced over several months of continuous operation. Railway tracks connected the chambers to the pits, facilitating the transport of bodies using improvised wagons. The design also included specialized auxiliary structures. The lazaret was a mock infirmary used for the direct execution of elderly, sick, or deported individuals deemed unsuitable for the standard chamber process. An open pit and a machine gun completed this alternative disposal site. The sorting depots occupied large barracks where the deportees' belongings were separated into categories: men's, women's, and children's clothing, footwear, jewelry, money, documents, and religious objects. Sonderkommando personnel sorted these materials under German supervision, packaging them for shipment to Germany as part of the war effort. The camp had its own electrical system, powered by diesel generators, which provided nighttime lighting for continuous operations. Communications were maintained via direct telephone lines with the Lublin District Office and Operation Reinhard headquarters in Berlin. The efficiency of the design was evident in the complete absence of permanent accommodation facilities for deportees. There were no dormitories, dining rooms, or sanitary facilities for the population arriving on the trains. This architectural absence reflects the camp's exclusively eliminatory function. Deportees were executed on the day of their arrival without any intervening periods of detention. Franz Stangl, camp commandant since September 1942, implemented precise schedules that optimized the use of the facilities. Trains arrived every 2 hours during the busiest days. The entire cycle from descent to disposal of bodies was completed in less than 3 hours, allowing for immediate reception of the next convoy. The Architects of Horror. Operational Command of Treblinka. Treblinka 2 was the only Nazi extermination camp to have a medical doctor as its first commandant. SS Obersturmführer Irmfried Ebel, a psychiatrist linked to the euthanasia program at Bernburg, was appointed camp commander on July 11, 1942. Having come from the gas extermination facilities in Germany, Ebel had no experience managing a mass extermination center and was ordered to begin operations immediately. Within a few days, trains began arriving at an absolutely overwhelming frequency. The pace of deportations exceeded all expectations. The camp facilities were still unfinished. The gas chambers failed. The assigned motors couldn't withstand continuous use, and the bodies piled up with no method of disposal. Faced with these failures, the SS resorted to direct firing squads. Prisoners were executed outdoors and dumped in mass graves that were quickly overflowing. Gravediggers couldn't keep up. Nearby, the smell of decomposition was perceptible more than 10 kilometers from the perimeter. The situation was uncontrollable. The landing platforms were clogged with corpses and unsorted belongings. SS men and their Ukrainian auxiliaries fired randomly at the crowds disembarking the trains. No functional command structure existed. Chaos was evident in every sector. Unterscharführer Hans Hingst, a witness to the disaster, explained that so many transports were arriving that the staff could not handle the volume of prisoners. The camp operated in a state of permanent collapse. Oskar Berger, one of the few survivors of the 1943 uprising, described the scene he witnessed upon his arrival in August 1942. According to his testimony, hundreds of bodies littered the ground. Clothes, suitcases, and personal belongings were piled in confusion. Guards fired blindly from street corners. It was a picture of extermination without organization or concealment. On August 26, 1942, Odilo Globoknik made a surprise visit to Treblinka, accompanied by Christian Wirth and Josef Oberhauser. They found a scene that even the SS could not justify. Cameras were malfunctioning, bodies were not buried, and the smell permeated the camp boundaries. The execution of the plan was compromised. Ebel was dismissed that same day. Transports were immediately suspended, and Wirth was appointed temporary superintendent to reorganize operations. On September 1, 1942, Franz Stangl formally assumed command of the camp. He had been commandant at Sobibor and had a reputation as an efficient manager. During his car ride to Treblinka, he noticed corpses along the track, wagons parked for days, and bodies visible from the road. Upon arrival, he immediately undertook an overhaul of operations. Stangl ordered the bodies removed, the graves enlarged, and the pace of transport stabilized. He reorganized the work groups and implemented a strict scheduling system. On September 3rd, the trains began arriving again. A regular flow was established: unloading, separation, stripping, gassing, and disposal of bodies. The time between the arrival of a convoy and the complete elimination of its occupants was reduced to less than 3 hours. In addition to operational reforms, Stangl introduced cosmetic changes. He had roads paved in the administrative sector known as the Wohnlager. Flowers were planted along the internal roads. These measures sought to create an image of order and cleanliness to reduce panic among the new arrivals. Deportees were informed that they were in transit to Ukraine through verbal communications translated by prisoners. SS officers wore white coats to reinforce the lie. The commandant rarely participated in the executions. He controlled everything from his office. He occasionally appeared dressed in a white uniform and carrying a whip. The prisoners nicknamed him the White Death. He delegated authority to his subordinates, who administered punishments, ran the barracks, and controlled the Sonderkommando groups. Under his command, the camp reached its maximum operational capacity. Throughout 1943, the processes were refined. The gas chambers were enlarged, the number of graves increased. Incineration pits were built to replace burial pits. Operation Reinhard was at its peak. In May and June of that year, during the liquidation of the Warsaw Ghetto, record numbers were reached, up to 20,000 murders per day. Following the August 2, 1943 revolt, in which several prisoners escaped, and as the program was gradually shut down, Stangl was transferred to Trieste along with Globoknik. Kurt Franz, the camp's third and final commander, took his place. He was already known among the prisoners for his brutality. It was under his command that the elimination of evidence was completed. Franz, nicknamed Lalka, the doll, for his expressionless face, personally directed executions for minor infractions. His dog, Barry, attacked prisoners on his direct orders. Forced labor continued, focused on destroying evidence. Graves were emptied, bodies were incinerated, barracks were dismantled. Operation 1005 was already underway. During this period, a symbolic element of control was introduced: the Treblinka song. According to testimony, it was written by prisoner Walter Hirsch and set to music by Artur Gold, a renowned Jewish composer from Warsaw. The melody was cheerful and taught to new members of the Sonderkommando from the first day. An orchestra of 10 forced musicians played it in the SS mess hall. Gold died during the revolt. Franz kept a personal photo album entitled Schöne Zeiten, Good Times. It included carefully selected images of SS personnel, mechanized grave digging, nearby brick factories, and other scenes. He never included photographs of the gas chambers or executions. The album became one of the few direct visual sources from the camp staff. The operational closure of Treblinka II was officially announced in November 1943. However, dismantling efforts continued for several months. Prisoners from Treblinka I were forced to complete the cleanup and camouflage work. The grounds were ploughed, crops were sown, trees were planted, and a fake farm was set up to conceal all traces of the camp. The operational command of Treblinka II was marked by a rapid sequence of changes, from initial chaos under Ebel to murderous efficiency under Stangl, and finally to a phase of systematic cover-up under Franz. In just over a year of operation, the camp exterminated nearly 900,000 people. Its leadership changed 3 times, but the objective was always the same: to kill quickly without witnesses and without leaving traces. The cycle of horror, transportation, gas, and graves. The extermination process at Treblinka II operated as a synchronized industrial system, with each phase timed and coordinated to maximize efficiency. From the moment the trains pulled into the platform to the final disposal of the bodies, each step followed established protocols that turned mass murder into an administrative routine. The deportees arrived in convoys operated by the Reich Railways, using cattle cars converted for human transport. Each car held between 100 and 150 people in extremely overcrowded conditions, without ventilation, water, or sanitary facilities. Full trains carried between 5,000 and 7,000 people per trip. The routes originated from the main ghettos of the general government: Warsaw, Radom, Białystok, Lublin, and from more distant regions such as Greece and the Netherlands. The journey could last from a few hours to several days, depending on the distance and the priorities of military rail traffic. During the journey, many deportees died from asphyxiation, dehydration, or exhaustion. The bodies remained in the carriages with the survivors until they reached their destination. At Malkinia station, the trains were divided into smaller sections to enter the branch line leading directly to Treblinka II. This division was made because the camp's track could only accommodate 15 to 20 cars at a time. The rest of the convoy waited at Malkinia until the first section had completed the unloading and running process. Upon reaching the platform at Treblinka II, the SS personnel and Ukrainian auxiliaries ordered immediate disembarkation with shouts, whistles, and banging. The deportees, disoriented by the journey and weakened by the conditions of transport, were quickly organized into separate lines, men on one side, women and children on the other. This separation, presented as a temporary administrative measure, prevented the organization of family resistance. German officers addressed the new arrivals in several languages, explaining that they were in a transit camp where they would be disinfected before their work relocation to the occupied Eastern Territory. They were instructed to leave their belongings in an orderly manner, remember the car number for later retrieval, and proceed in a disciplined manner to the bathing barracks. Members of the Sonderkommando, Jewish prisoners selected for auxiliary operations, assisted in translating orders and collecting baggage. These men, who knew the true fate of the deportees, worked under threat of immediate death if they revealed information or refused to fulfill their duties. The stripping of belongings took place in the barracks described above. The deportees had to strip completely naked and hang their clothes on numbered hooks. The Sonderkommando personnel immediately collected the belongings, sorting them into categories for later shipment to Germany. Jewelry, money, documents, and valuables were separated into special containers. After stripping, the deportees were directed toward the aforementioned corridor, flanked by armed guards and members of the Sonderkommando who maintained a steady flow with seemingly routine instructions. Passing through this structure eliminated any possibility of retreat or organized resistance. The daily operation of the facility followed strict protocols established by Stangl. Early in the day, the first train arrived, and after unloading, the empty cars were sent back. While one group was processed in the first chambers, the next group was prepared in the undressing barracks. This time, coordination allowed for continuous operations without significant interruptions. The technical process required logistical precision. The deportees were packed into the available space until they reached maximum capacity, approximately one person per 0.25 square meters. Once the metal doors were closed from the outside, German or Ukrainian technicians activated the motors. The exposure time varied between 20 and 30 minutes, depending on the number of people and the weather conditions. Once all occupants were confirmed dead, the doors were opened and members of the Sonderkommando entered to extract the bodies. This work was done with hooks and ropes, as the bodies were frequently intertwined due to the compression in the confined space. The bodies showed signs of asphyxiation, internal bleeding, and in many cases crushing injuries. The corpses were subjected to a systematic examination. Their heads were cut to collect human hair used in the German textile industry. Gold teeth, dentures, and other metal implants were removed. Body cavities were searched for hidden jewelry or valuables. This material was sorted and packaged for shipment to SS headquarters. The bodies were initially disposed of by burial in mass graves, previously excavated to the specified dimensions. However, the volume of bodies and the climatic conditions caused technical problems. Decomposition gases generated underground pressure that partially forced bodies to surface. In January 1943, on the direct orders of Heinrich Himmler, a system of mass cremation was implemented to eliminate physical evidence of the murders. Makeshift grills were constructed using railroad tracks supported by cement blocks. The bodies were incinerated in piles of up to 2,000 corpses, fueling the flames with wood and the body fat generated during the process. The Sonderkommando was organized into specialized teams with specific functions. One group was responsible for unloading trains and the initial handling of deportees. Another team managed the sorting of belongings in the barracks. A third group operated directly in the chambers, guiding victims, extracting bodies, and subsequent cleaning. A fourth team handled cremation and ash disposal. These prisoners worked under extreme conditions of psychological pressure. They knew their final destination and that they would be eliminated periodically to avoid long-term witnesses. They were provided with slightly improved food rations and access to alcohol as methods of control. These teams rotated every few weeks through summary executions and replacement with new deportees. The most widely accepted estimates indicate that between 870,000 and 925,000 people were murdered between July 1942 and August 1943. The busiest periods during the liquidation of the Warsaw Ghetto saw up to 20,000 murders per day. Rebellion at Treblinka, the cry of the dead. During the first months of 1943, several factors converged to generate the conditions that would precipitate the Treblinka uprising. The gradual reduction in the number of transports, the increasing frequency of executions of Sonderkommando members, and the clear signs that the camp was being prepared for closure alerted the prisoners to the imminent end of their total elimination. A clandestine group began to organize during March 1943, comprised of prisoners with access to strategic areas of the camp. Zelo Blok, a former Czechoslovak soldier assigned to the belongings sorting area, emerged as the main coordinator. His prior military knowledge was crucial for tactical planning. Jan Piłonski, a Polish mechanic who worked in vehicle maintenance, provided technical information on guard schedules and German personnel movements. Eugen Turovsky, a Ukrainian locksmith assigned to the workshops, played a key role in obtaining materials. His technical skills allowed him to make copies of keys to access weapons and fuel depots. Samuel Willenberg, just 19 years old and assigned to transporting bodies, served as a communication link between the different Sonderkommando teams due to his mobility within the camp. The organization was structured into cells of 3 to 4 members who maintained limited contact with each other to avoid total exposure in the event of discovery. Each cell had a specific function: obtaining weapons, gathering fuel, mapping escape routes, and coordinating signals for the start of the uprising. During April and May, the conspirators carried out small test sabotage operations to study the guards' reaction times. Brief power outages, minor damage to vehicles, and disruptions to the internal communication system were carried out without raising widespread suspicion. These tests revealed patterns in security responses and identified times of decreased vigilance. Obtaining weapons represented the most complex logistical challenge. Turovsky managed to access the weapons depot using duplicate keys, stealing rifles, pistols, German grenades, and ammunition in small quantities over several weeks. The weapons were hidden at various points in the camp. buried near cremation pits concealed among work tools and distributed among trusted members. The prisoners also made improvised weapons using tools available in the workshops. Knives, metal bars, hammers and axes were modified for offensive use. Incendiary cocktails were prepared using bottles collected from the victims' personal belongings, filling them with gasoline diverted from camp vehicles. The date for the survey was determined by operational and weather factors. August 2, 1943 was chosen because Mondays typically saw less transport activity, resulting in a reduced presence of guards on the receiving platform. Furthermore, weather conditions had been dry during July, facilitating the spread of fires in the camp's wooden structures. The time was set for 4 p.m., the time when the Ukrainian guards were changing shifts and several SS officers were retreating to their barracks for their afternoon rest. This window of reduced surveillance offered the best opportunity to launch the attack with a tactical advantage. The plan established a coordinated sequence of actions. The initial signal would be a rifle shot, immediately followed by grenade launching at the main office and fuel depot. The ensuing fires would serve as a diversion and destroy key documents and installations. Simultaneously, armed teams would attack the watchtowers and guard posts. During the preceding weeks, the conspirators identified weak points along the camp's perimeter, especially in the sections of wire fence near the clothing and footwear storage areas. These areas were selected as escape routes due to their lesser surveillance and proximity to the surrounding forest. The uprising began as planned, but not without complications. At approximately 3:30 p.m., a Ukrainian guard discovered a prisoner in possession of gold coins in the sorting area, triggering a partial alert. Despite this setback, the group's leaders decided to proceed with the original plan. At 3:45 p.m., the first shot rang out in the camp. Stanislav Levin, a member of the resistance group, threw a grenade into the German staff mess, starting the first fire. Other conspirators immediately attacked the fuel depot with incendiary cocktails. The flames quickly spread to the storage barracks, creating a smokescreen that covered part of the camp. The armed clashes took place simultaneously at several points. Baruch Laser managed to seize a machine gun from a watchtower and turned it on the guards, providing covering fire for prisoners rushing toward the perimeter fences. Other groups attacked guard posts with captured weapons and improvised tools. The initial confusion favored the rebels. Many Ukrainian guards, surprised by the scale of the attack, abandoned their positions. Some SS officers attempted to organize a defensive response, but multiple fires and the dispersion of the fighting made coordination difficult. Approximately 300 prisoners managed to cross the perimeter during the first 30 minutes of the uprising. Most headed toward the adjacent forest, following previously identified routes. However, many were killed at the barbed wire fences or in the open ground separating the camp from the wooded area. The German response was organized gradually. Reinforcements arrived from Treblinka 1, the Troniki training camp, and nearby military posts. Units with sniffer dogs, armored vehicles, and air support were deployed for the pursuit in the forests. Most of the fugitives were captured or eliminated within the first 48 hours after the uprising. Of the approximately 700 prisoners who were at Treblinka 2 on the day of the uprising, between 200 and 300 managed to escape. However, only 60 to 70 survived until the end of the war, some joining partisan units or being hidden by Polish civilians. The uprising precipitated the camp's final closure and accelerated the dismantling plans that were already underway. Operation 1005, Destruction of All Traces. Action 1005 represented the systematic Nazi effort to erase physical evidence of mass crimes in Eastern Europe. At Treblinka, this operation took on extreme urgency following the August 2nd uprising, which had compromised operational security and accelerated closure schedules. Fear of a possible liberation of the camp by the Red Army, advancing from the east, forced the SS High Command to eliminate all visible signs of the genocide. In July 1943, Heinrich Himmler issued direct orders to completely dismantle all the Operation Reinhard camps. The instructions were clear: disinter the bodies, incinerate them, remove all structures, and alter the appearance of the grounds to prevent any further investigation. This order was executed by a special unit, Sonderkommando 1005, led by SS Standartenführer Paul Blobel. This officer had already gained experience in similar operations in Ukraine, where he applied mass cremation techniques in mass graves. Treblinka, which operated between July 1942 and October 1943, became one of the main centers of Action 1005 due to the volume of bodies buried there. An estimated 700,000 to 900,000 people were murdered at the camp, most of them buried in trenches and pits dug into the sandy ground. Sonderkommando 1005 began operations immediately, bringing in heavy machinery, backhoes, cranes, crushing tools and fuel cans. The first tasks involved locating, opening and emptying the mass graves. These pits were arranged in parallel rows, many of them up to 7 meters deep, and contained corpses in varying states of decomposition. The stench was unbearable. Even with improvised masks and rudimentary protective suits, the Sonderkommando workers, mostly Jewish prisoners transferred from other camps or transit camps, suffered constant nausea, infections and physical collapse. The bodies were lifted out by crane and placed in mounds for later incineration. The oldest remains were mummified or turned into a viscous mass. The youngest still retained tissue. The body fat from the bodies was used as additional fuel, according to reports recorded in later court testimony. Makeshift grills were built using railroad tracks supported by concrete blocks. On these platforms, the bodies were arranged in alternating layers of wood and other fuels. The flames burned for days without interruption. The charred remains were processed in a second phase. German soldiers and Traunikes forced the prisoners to crush bones with metal hammers or adapted rollers. The goal was to obtain a fine powder without identifiable traces. This powder was scattered in adjacent wooded areas mixed with plowed soil or thrown into the nearby Bug River. Each operation was recorded, and internal reports were kept to demonstrate compliance with orders to completely eliminate evidence. While the cremation progressed, other teams worked on the systematic demolition of the camp. Barracks, gas chambers, barbed wire fences, railway platforms, and watchtowers were destroyed. Some were dynamited, others dismantled piece by piece for reuse. The bricks from the gas chambers were repurposed to build a camp house to camouflage the center of the camp. The internal railway tracks were dismantled and the rails sent to railway workshops in Lublin. Any sign of the extermination infrastructure was carefully erased. The final phase of Action 1005 in Treblinka was the visual transformation of the landscape. Grass, rye, barley and lupine crops were planted to cover the affected areas. Saplings, fir, pine and poplar were planted following natural patterns to disguise the artificial origins of the surroundings. Agricultural technicians assisted in the planting of irregular rows, and animals were brought in to simulate farming activity. As part of the cover, a farm was set up with a living quarters, a corral and a field. This farm was assigned to a Ukrainian collaborator named Strebel, who was installed as a settler in charge of the fictitious agricultural operations. He raised pigs, poultry and grew vegetables under the indirect supervision of the SS. His task was to ensure that the site had the appearance of an abandoned or partially functioning farm, hindering any aerial or ground investigation. German documents indicate that the farm even had a working mailbox. The cover-up was so effective that when Soviet forces reached the area in 1944, they found a field filled with crops with no visible structures. However, subsequent analysis of aerial photographs and testimony from the few survivors allowed them to partially reconstruct the original layout of the camp. Some bone remains and personal belongings were found years later, especially during unofficial excavations or forensic investigations. In late July 1944, Soviet forces began rapidly approaching from the east. In response, the retreating Germans destroyed the villages near Treblinka to eliminate any trace of camp-related activity. As part of this cover-up operation, 761 buildings in Poniatowo, Prostin and Grondy were burned to the ground. Numerous families died during these attacks. Grain fields that had been used to supply the SS were also burned. On August 19, 1944, in a final attempt to halt the Soviet advance and destroy the last symbolic remnants of the local presence, German forces dynamited the Prostin church and its bell tower, which had served as a defensive observation point. When the Soviets finally entered Treblinka on August 16, 1944, the extermination zone had been completely leveled, ploughed, and covered with lupine, creating a deceptively rural appearance. Soviet war correspondent Vasily Grossman, one of the first to enter the area, described the visible remains. Small pieces of human bone scattered across the ground, teeth, scraps of cloth, papers, broken plates, jars, shaving brushes, rusty pots, cups, and strands of human hair. These material remains, invisible from the air but indelible on the ground, offered mute and disturbing evidence of what had happened there. Compared to other extermination camps, the concealment at Treblinka was the most complete. Unlike Bełżec, where some structural remains remained, or Sobibor, where demolitions were more hasty, Treblinka was the subject of a meticulous operation. Even the internal road system was destroyed and replaced with rural paths. Mature trees were felled and replaced with young ones to erase any trace of disturbance to the ground. Sonderkommando 1005 remained active until October 1943. Once the cremations and cleansing were completed, the prisoners who participated in the action were executed to ensure secrecy. It is estimated that between 300 and 700 forced laborers were murdered after completing their task. The elimination of witnesses was an essential part of the plan. German documents only mention that the operation was completed as planned. This effort to conceal the mass crime was not entirely successful. The existence of the camp, the testimony of escapees like Samuel Willenberg and Richard Glazar, and subsequent discoveries made it possible to document the events. However, the attempt to erase all physical evidence was one of the most sophisticated of the Nazi machinery. Treblinka disappeared from the map as a physical structure, but the human traces remained. In the Düsseldorf trials and subsequent investigations, the Action 1005 operations at this camp were described as the systematic destruction of evidence of industrialized murder. The methods developed here would later be applied in other contexts. At Treblinka, death was followed by the attempt to completely erase its traces, a final phase of dehumanization planned with bureaucratic precision. Buried evidence remains that do not keep silent. Nazi efforts to eliminate evidence proved partially effective but incomplete from a forensic perspective. Material evidence gradually resurfaced through accidental finds, academic research, and technological developments that allowed for non-invasive analysis of the site. Despite ploughing, artificial reforestation, and the installation of a mock farm on the site, the physical traces of the genocide persisted beneath the surface and, in some cases, emerged into view over time. During the 1940s and 1950s, local residents explored the area for valuables, making significant discoveries: watches, rings, coins, eyeglasses, and partially preserved documents. Many of these objects were recovered from areas where Sonderkommando 1005's operations had been rushed or incomplete. Natural processes also contributed to the erosion, revealing bone fragments, teeth, and personal belongings buried shallowly during cover-up operations. Some farmers collected remains for personal use or resale, while others handed them over to the authorities. The Polish Commissions of Inquiry, active between 1945 and 1950, conducted the first systematic documentation of the site. These commissions included forensic doctors, engineers, and military technicians who inspected the terrain, collected remains, and photographed the site. They recorded unevenly distributed charred bones, skull fragments, vertebrae, and limbs, with a greater concentration in areas where cremation pyres had been located. Many of these remains were preserved in forensic laboratories at the Warsaw Institute of Forensic Medicine. Some anatomical specimens, such as jawbones with complete dentures, allowed for the validation of witness accounts of the number of bodies and the methods of cremation. In 1959, Samuel Willenberg returned to the site accompanied by researchers and journalists. He visually identified key points of the former camp, including the entrance road, the unloading ramp, and the extermination area. His observations allowed for a more precise location of the main structures. He also personally collected fragments of metal objects and bones, which were later compared with court records. His drawings and descriptions provided the first detailed topographic reconstructions, becoming a fundamental reference for subsequent research and the basis for current three-dimensional models. During the 1990s, advances in remote sensing technologies enabled sophisticated studies without direct excavation. A 1994 study by the Institute of Contemporary History in Warsaw identified irregularities through analysis of vegetation patterns, thermal anomalies, and moisture retention, confirming the layout of rectangular trenches and incineration zones. This data was cross-referenced with aerial photographs taken by the Allies in 1944 and with plans reconstructed from survivor accounts. In 2010, forensic archaeologist Caroline Sturdy-Coles began a multidisciplinary project focused on Treblinka, using exclusively non-invasive technologies in compliance with Jewish religious restrictions. Her team employed ground-penetrating radar, LiDAR, magnetic scanning, and multispectral aerial photography to create three-dimensional maps without disturbing the ground. The research was conducted in collaboration with the Warsaw Holocaust Museum and the Staffordshire University Centre of Archaeology. Ground-penetrating radar detected buried rectangular structures with dimensions consistent with historical descriptions of the gas chambers. Digital models revealed at least 3 main structures, each measuring between 8 and 10 meters in length, located in the area identified as the Extermination area, consistent with reports of the chamber expansion in 1942. Areas with a high density of altered mineral material, interpreted as human ashes mixed with sand, were also located. More than 20 additional geometric anomalies were interpreted as possible mass graves based on their shape, depth, and internal density. Magnetic prospecting revealed buried metallic objects, fragments of rails used in cremation, abandoned tools, and unrecovered personal belongings. Among the surface finds exposed by natural erosion were a pendant bearing Frankfurt am Main and the date 3rd March 2029, a Silver Star of David, fragments of a child's shoe, a Catholic religious medal, and a plaque inscribed with General Government. These finds were catalogued, photographed, and stored in Polish museums. Some personal objects have been digitized and are available in databases accessible to victims, families, and memory projects. Others were used as material evidence in international historical and documentary research. The investigations led by Coles's team marked a methodological turning point. Their respectful and rigorous approach was later adopted in studies of other extermination sites, such as Sobibor, as well as in contemporary scenarios of crimes against humanity in Rwanda, Bosnia, and Iraq. The methodology developed at Treblinka became the standard for forensic archaeology in contexts where ethical or religious restrictions prevent exhumation. Furthermore, the results were presented to international heritage preservation organizations. In 2013, the team's final report was used to strengthen the Treblinka Memorial's nomination to UNESCO. Documenting the subsoil and structures made it possible to more precisely establish the camp's true boundaries, beyond those visible on the surface, which has been key to delimiting protected and restricted areas. The data obtained was also used to generate an interactive digital reconstruction of the camp, used in museums and virtual exhibitions. This educational tool allows visitors to digitally explore the site as it existed between 1942 and 1943, integrating geophysical maps, survivor testimonies, and historical documents. Some recent finds have been the subject of traceability projects. The Frankfurt pendant, for example, was investigated in collaboration with German civil archives and was linked to a young woman deported from that location in 1942. Cases like this illustrate how archaeological evidence, even fragmentary, can help reconstruct individual identities and restore agency to victims. In legal terms, archaeological evidence has been used to refute denialism and reinforce oral testimony. Although the main trials took place decades earlier, some of the data obtained has been presented at international conferences on Holocaust remembrance and in judicial training courses on war crimes. Treblinka is cited as a paradigmatic example of a camp without visible structural remains that nevertheless has verifiable material traceability. Taken together, the material evidence from Treblinka confirms and validates the descriptions given by survivors. The detected dimensions, relative locations, density of human remains, and nature of the objects found coincide remarkably with the accounts collected in court proceedings. This cross-referencing of sources makes Treblinka an emblematic case of how archaeological science can support testimonial memory. Despite the meticulous attempt to erase all traces, Treblinka continues to speak from underground, not with walls or ruins, but with fragments, densities, and voids detected by waves and scanners. The dispersed materiality of the crime, once buried, emerges as evidence. History left traces, science found them, and memory sustains them. German justice, trial against the SS command. The prosecution of those responsible for Treblinka unfolded over more than 3 decades, constituting one of the longest legal efforts related to Holocaust crimes. The trials faced unique challenges: the geographical dispersion of defendants, the destruction of evidence, and the need to reconstruct events in a field specifically designed to leave no trace. Investigations began in 1945 when Polish and Soviet authorities documented the site and collected initial testimonies. However, most of the operators had fled or adopted false identities. The Ludwigsburg Central Office, established in 1958, coordinated the German investigations by compiling personnel lists based on recovered SS documents, survivor testimony, and confessions from defendants captured in other trials. Franz Stangl became a prime target of these investigations. He had escaped using the rat route, arriving in Brazil in 1951 under false documents. For 16 years, he lived openly in Sao Paulo, working at Volkswagen under his real name. His location was achieved through cooperation between Austrian investigators, the Brazilian Federal Police, and Simon Wiesenthal. Stangl's arrest on February 28, 1967, was carried out without resistance at his workplace. The Brazilian government approved his extradition within 6 months, setting a precedent for international cooperation in war crimes. The trial took place in Düsseldorf between May and December 1970. The prosecution held him responsible for the murder of at least 400,000 people during his time as commander. The court heard 85 witnesses, including survivors, former SS members, and historical documentation experts. The testimonies of Willenberg, Glazar, and other survivors provided detailed descriptions of daily camp routines, Stangl's direct participation in operations, and his complete knowledge of the extermination effort. Documentary evidence included operational orders, administrative correspondence, production reports, and Allied aerial photographs. The Bundesarchiv provided original documents demonstrating the command structure of Operation Reinhard and Stangl's specific position within this hierarchy. During the trial, Stangl admitted knowledge of operations but denied personal responsibility, citing higher orders and an administrative role. The court found Stangl guilty on December 22, 1970, and sentenced him to life imprisonment. He died of heart failure in prison on June 28, 1971. His final statements to Gitta Serini provide additional insight into the mentality and motivations of extermination camp operators. Kurt Franz was arrested in 1959 and tried in the Düsseldorf mega-trial between 1964 and 1965, along with 10 other defendants. He faced charges of mass murder, organizing extermination operations, and direct participation in individual executions. Testimonies described him as exceptionally cruel, responsible for arbitrary executions and torture. Gustav Münzberger, the technician responsible for gas chamber operations, was tried simultaneously. His charges included direct participation in extermination and specialized technical knowledge that facilitated murderous operations. Both defendants' defenses relied on hierarchical subordination and ignorance of ultimate consequences. The court rejected these arguments after examining evidence of voluntary participation and complete knowledge. Franz received a life sentence on September 3, 1965, while Münzberger received 12 years. Other defendants in the same trial received sentences ranging from 3 to 15 years, depending on their level of participation. Samuel Willenberg testified in multiple trials, providing testimony of high probative value due to its consistency with documentary records and testimony from other survivors. His handwritten plans of the camp were admitted as key topographical evidence. The trials were based on SS archival materials, personnel lists, duty assignment documents, internal correspondence from the Action Reinhard project, and photographs of logistics units. Allied and Soviet aerial images confirmed the location and dimensions of buildings mentioned in testimony. Heinrich Mattes, Arthur Daxel, and Otto Stadi faced separate trials in German and Austrian courts over the following decades. Many died before completing their sentences due to advanced age and medical conditions. Düsseldorf records indicate that these factors influenced sentence reductions or suspensions of execution. The court archives provided exhaustive documentation of Treblinka's operational structure. The transcripts, testimonies, and analysis of evidence created a detailed historical record used by academic researchers for decades. Institutions such as the Munich Institute for Contemporary History and Yad Vashem have made extensive use of these materials. The court documents established fundamental precedents for future prosecutions of war crimes and genocide. The rulings provided legal validation of historical testimony and definitive refutation of denialist claims. The trials demonstrated that individual responsibility transcends institutional orders and extraordinary circumstances. The persistence of investigations over 3 decades demonstrated institutional commitment to accountability for war crimes, establishing that certain crimes do not have a statute of limitations. The Treblinka precedents influenced the development of modern international criminal law and the creation of specialized tribunals for crimes against humanity, consolidating principles that continue to be applied in contemporary judicial proceedings.